Ambassador Vex 9 adjusted his biosuit nervously, watching the primitive blue planet through the observation deck of the Hegemony flagship, Eternal Dominance. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit that had developed over his 2 centuries of diplomatic service. Today marked the beginning of what the High Command called Operation Generous Gift, though Vex 9 suspected the humans would have a different name for it entirely. Sir? His aide, a younger Zephyrian named Klaus 14, approached with a datapad clutched in his tentacles. The human delegation is requesting permission to board. Their ship is quaint. Vex 9 snorted, a sound that came out as a wet burble through his breathing apparatus. Quaint. That was diplomatic speak for, looks like it was assembled by blind children using scrap metal and prayer. The humans had somehow managed to achieve faster-than-light travel, using what appeared to be duct tape, caffeine, and pure, stubborn refusal to acknowledge the laws of physics. "Let them come aboard," Vex 9 said, straightening his ceremonial sash. "And Klaus? Try not to laugh at their technology. The High Command wants this to appear charitable." The irony wasn't lost on him. The Galactic Hegemony, spanning 12,000 star systems and boasting weapons capable of cracking planets like eggs, was about to play the role of benevolent benefactor to a species that had barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. It would have been endearing if it wasn't so perfectly orchestrated. 20 minutes later, the human delegation shuffled into the conference chamber with all the grace of newborn gazelles. Their leader, a woman with graying hair and steel-blue eyes, wore what appeared to be a military uniform held together with optimism and determination. According to his briefing files, this was Admiral Rebecca Torres, Earth's first interstellar diplomat, and, apparently, someone with the survival instincts of a caffeinated lemming. "Ambassador Vex 9, Torres said, extending her hand in the peculiar human greeting ritual. "Thank you for accepting our request for this meeting." Vex 9 grasped her tiny fingers with one of his smaller appendages, marveling at how fragile humans seemed. Their bones were hollow like birds, their skin thin as paper, and they required a specific mixture of gases just to remain conscious. It was almost tragic how easily they could be eliminated. Almost. "Admiral Torres, the pleasure is entirely ours," Vex 9 replied, his translator rendering his words into the human's simple language. "The Hegemony has been watching your species with great interest." That was technically true. They'd been watching humans the same way a scientist watches bacteria in a petri dish, waiting to see when it would be necessary to sterilize the entire sample. Torres smiled, showing her small, flat teeth. "We're honored by your attention. Earth is eager to join the galactic community." Oh, how perfectly naive. Vex 9 gestured toward the conference table, a massive slab of Andromedan crystal that cost more than most human cities. "Please, be seated. We have much to discuss." The human delegation consisted of Torres, a younger man with nervous eyes who was introduced as Doctor, Marcus Webb, and a woman whose intense stare suggested she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Commander Elena Price, according to the files, Earth's top military strategist and someone who, disappointingly, seemed to possess actual intelligence. "As you know," Vex 9 began, activating the holographic display at the center of the table, "your species has recently achieved interstellar capability. This is commendable." The display showed Earth's pathetic excuse for a space fleet. 12 ships that looked like they'd been designed by committee and assembled by the lowest bidder. The humans' faces showed pride as they gazed at their accomplishment. It was almost enough to make Vex 9 feel guilty. Almost. "However," he continued, "space is a dangerous place. There are hostile species, cosmic phenomena, and various other threats that could prove challenging for a young civilization. Dr. Webb leaned forward eagerly. That's exactly why we requested this meeting. We've heard stories about the hegemony's technological superiority. We hoped you might be willing to share some knowledge, perhaps in exchange for cultural information or resources. Perfect. They were asking for the rope before he'd even offered it. The hegemony believes in helping emerging species, Vex 9 said, trying not to let his amusement show. We have prepared a gift for humanity, a gesture of goodwill. He activated another section of the display, showing technical specifications that would have made the humans' brightest scientists weep with joy. Fusion reactors, advanced materials, energy weapons, shield generators, all the tools a growing civilization would need to defend itself, and all perfectly designed to ensure humanity's eventual destruction. This is incredible, Dr. Webb breathed, his eyes wide. These designs are centuries ahead of anything we have. 5 centuries to be precise, Vex 9 said. But who's counting? Commander Price, however, was frowning. This is very generous, Ambassador. Perhaps too generous. What does the hegemony gain from this arrangement? Clever human. Vex 9 had hoped she wouldn't ask that question quite so directly. The galaxy is vast, Commander, he replied smoothly. The hegemony values diversity and growth. Consider this an investment in your species' future. What he didn't mention was that the investment came with built-in obsolescence. Every technology they were offering contained subtle flaws, hidden weaknesses that would ensure human weapons could never pose a real threat to hegemony forces. The fusion reactors would fail under specific harmonic frequencies. The shields would collapse when exposed to certain energy signatures. The weapons systems contained quantum locks that could be disabled remotely. It was brilliant, really. Humanity would spend decades, perhaps centuries, building up their military capability using hegemony technology. They'd feel strong, confident, maybe even a little aggressive. And when the time came for the hegemony to claim Earth's resources and strategic position, humanity's own weapons would turn against them at the flip of a switch. Admiral Torres was studying the displays with obvious excitement. How soon could we begin implementing these technologies? Immediately, if you wish, Vex 9 said. Our technical teams can provide detailed specifications, training materials, even advisors if necessary. All we ask in return is a formal alliance treaty. The treaty, of course, contained enough legal loopholes to drive a dreadnought through. But humans were notorious for signing first and reading the fine print later. This is beyond anything we dared hope for, Torres said. I'll need to consult with Earth's leadership, but I can't imagine they'll refuse such a generous offer. Commander Price was still looking suspicious. What about other species in this region? Are there any territorial disputes we should know about? Vex 9's tertiary heart skipped a beat. Another excellent question from the annoyingly perceptive human. The nearest hostile species are the Chronari Collective, he said, which was technically true. What he didn't mention was that the Chronari were 3,000 light-years away and had been extinct for 2 centuries. They're known for aggressive expansion and have been eyeing your sector for some time. The look of concern that passed between the humans was exactly what he'd hoped for. Fear was such a useful motivator. How dangerous are they? Dr. Webb asked. Let's just say your current technology would be inadequate against their forces, Vex 9 replied. But with our assistance, you'd be well prepared for any potential conflict. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Create a phantom threat, offer the solution, and watch as the targets eagerly embrace their own doom. The High Command would be pleased with his performance. Admiral Torres stood up, extending her hand again. Ambassador, on behalf of Earth and humanity, I want to thank you for this incredible opportunity. We accept your offer of alliance and technological assistance. Wonderful, Vex 9 said, grasping her hand with what he hoped looked like warmth. I'll have my technical staff prepare the data packages immediately. Your species' future has never looked brighter. And it was true, in a sense. Humanity's future would be very bright indeed, right up until the moment the hegemony decided it was time to collect on their investment. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Commander Price lingered behind. Ambassador, she said quietly, I want you to know that humanity has survived this long by being suspicious of gifts that seem too good to be true. Vex 9 felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. I'm not sure I understand your meaning, Commander. I think you understand perfectly, Price replied, her gray eyes hard as steel. But we're not in a position to refuse your offer. Just remember that humans have a saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. She turned and walked away, leaving Vex 9 staring after her with growing unease. Perhaps this wouldn't be quite as simple as the High Command had predicted. Later, alone in his chambers, Vex 9 reviewed the encounter while sipping fermented algae wine. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, but something about Commander Price's parting words bothered him. Humans had a reputation for unpredictability, for finding solutions that defied logic and expectation. Still, what could they possibly do? They were getting exactly what they'd asked for: advanced technology to defend themselves. The fact that it came with hidden vulnerabilities was simply the price of doing business with a species that thought duct tape was an acceptable starship repair material. His communication console chimed with an incoming message from High Command. Status report, Ambassador. Phase 1 complete, Supreme Commander. Vex 9 replied to the shadowy figure on the screen. The humans have accepted our offer. They'll begin implementing the technologies within the next standard cycle. Excellent. And their military leadership? Naive and eager for the most part. There's one officer who seems more cautious, but she's outnumbered by the optimists. Good. Maintain surveillance and continue to offer assistance. The more dependent they become on our technology, the easier the final phase will be. The transmission ended, leaving Vex 9 alone with his thoughts. In 5 years, maybe 10 at the outside, humanity would have built a formidable fleet using hegemony technology. They'd feel secure, perhaps even powerful. They might start making demands, asserting their independence, maybe even challenging hegemony authority in their region. And then, with a simple signal, every human weapon would shut down simultaneously. Their shields would fail, their reactors would overload, and their ships would become floating coffins. The hegemony would sweep in to claim Earth's resources and strategic position without firing a single shot in anger. It was elegant, it was efficient, it was absolutely foolproof. So why couldn't he shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake? 3 days later, Vex 9 received the first reports from the hegemony technical advisors who had traveled to Earth. The humans, it seemed, were not implementing the technologies quite as expected. They're modifying everything, reported Senior Technician Glax 2, his image flickering slightly due to the primitive human communication systems. Every single design we provided has been altered, sometimes beyond recognition. What do you mean, altered? Vex 9 asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. They're improving them, sir. The fusion reactor design has been modified for 47% greater efficiency. They've simplified the shield generators while somehow increasing their power output. And their weapons? Glax 2 paused, looking genuinely disturbed. Sir, they've weaponized our defensive systems and turned our weapons into defensive systems. It's like they're deliberately doing everything backwards. Vex 9 felt his primary stomach drop into his secondary stomach. Are the quantum locks still functional? That's the problem, sir. They've replaced most of our core systems with their own designs. The locks are still there, but they're no longer connected to anything critical. This was not part of the plan. Humans were supposed to be primitive, dependent, easy to manipulate. They weren't supposed to be talented enough to improve upon technology that had taken the hegemony centuries to perfect. How is this possible? Vex 9 muttered, more to himself than to Glax 2. Well, sir, they appear to have a completely different approach to engineering. Where we focus on elegance and efficiency, they seem to prioritize function and redundancy. They've added backup systems to our backup systems, and their materials, science, ... Glax 2 shuddered. They're creating alloys that shouldn't be possible with their level of technology. Continue monitoring the situation, Vex 9 ordered, and compile a detailed report on all modifications. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. As the transmission ended, Vex 9 realized that Operation Generous Gift might not unfold quite as smoothly as the High Command had anticipated. Humans, it seemed, had a talent for taking someone else's rope and fashioning it into something entirely unexpected. The question was, what were they building? And would the hegemony live to regret their generosity? 6 months after first contact, Vex 9 stood once again on the observation deck of the Eternal Dominance. But this time, he wasn't looking at a primitive blue planet. He was staring at what the humans called New Geneva Station, a massive space platform that shouldn't have been possible to construct with the technology they'd been given. Sir, Claus 14 approached with another data pad, his tentacles trembling slightly. The latest intelligence reports from Earth. Vex 9 accepted the pad with growing dread. What he read there confirmed his worst fears and introduced several new ones he hadn't even considered. The humans had not only modified every piece of hegemony technology, they'd reverse-engineered the underlying principles and begun developing entirely new applications. Their defense fleet now consisted of ships that were technically built using hegemony designs, but bore about as much resemblance to the original blueprints as a tiger bears to a house cat. And they were reproducing at an alarming rate. How many ships do they have now? Vex 9 asked weakly. Last count was 847 operational vessels, with 200 more under construction, Claus 14 replied. And sir, they've established colonies in 7 systems. 7 systems? But we only made first contact 8 months ago. Yes, sir. They appear to be very motivated. Vex 9 sank into his chair, feeling the weight of what he'd set in motion. The High Command had expected humanity to spend decades carefully implementing hegemony technology. Instead, they'd taken it, improved it, mass-produced it, and started expanding across local space faster than a plague of mechanical locusts. And somewhere out there, Admiral Torres and her fleet were probably laughing at how easy it had been to get the galaxy's most advanced civilization to hand over the keys to their own technology. The rope the hegemony had so generously provided was starting to look suspiciously like a noose. And Vex 9 was beginning to suspect that humanity had always intended to be the ones holding the other end. 2 years after first contact, Supreme Commander Thex Prime of the Galactic Hegemony received a priority transmission that made his 4 stomachs clench in synchronized terror. The message was brief, direct, and delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested the sender wasn't particularly worried about retaliation. "Greetings, Supreme Commander. This is Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Human Defense Coalition. We need to talk." The transmission originated from a location that, according to Hegemony star charts, should have been empty space. Instead, long-range sensors showed a structure so massive it had its own gravitational field. The humans had built what appeared to be a mobile fortress capable of housing millions of beings, and they'd parked it just outside Hegemony territory like a not-so-subtle reminder of their growing capabilities. "Get me Ambassador Vex 9, Thex Prime ordered his aide. "Now." When Vex 9 materialized on the holographic communicator, he looked like he'd aged several decades in the past 2 years. His usual diplomatic composure had been replaced by the haunted expression of someone who'd watched their carefully laid plans explode in their face. "Supreme Commander," Vex 9 began, "I assume you've received the human transmission?" "I have." "Explain to me how we went from generous benefactors to potential targets in less than 24 months. Vex 9's 3 eyes blinked in rapid succession. "Sir, the humans have proven to be far more adaptable than our initial assessments suggested. They've not only improved upon our technology, they've created entirely new branches of science we didn't know existed." "Such as?" "Quantum-locked fusion reactors that generate power by manipulating space-time itself. Shield systems that don't just deflect energy, they absorb it and convert it to additional defensive capability. And their weapons." Vex 9 paused, looking physically ill. "Sir, they've created something they call probability cannons. We're still trying to understand how they work, but preliminary reports suggest they fire bullets that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously." Thex Prime felt a migraine developing in his primary brain. "And the control systems we built into their technology? Completely bypassed. They kept our designs as backup systems, but built their own primary systems from scratch. When we attempted to activate the quantum locks remotely, their ships politely thanked us for the emergency diagnostic check, and continued with their operations." The Supreme Commander's tentacles began twitching with rage. "How many ships do they have now?" Current intelligence estimates put their fleet at over 15,000 vessels, with production facilities in 43 star systems. They've also established what they call embassy stations in 12 sectors, including 3 that are technically within hegemony space. "Embassy stations?" "Diplomatic outposts, sir. Heavily armed diplomatic outposts. They claim to be interested in fostering better relationships with their galactic neighbors. The stations are staffed by representatives from something called the Department of Aggressive Friendship." Thex Prime's headache was getting worse. "Department of Aggressive Friendship?" "Yes, sir. Led by a woman named Director Sarah Martinez, who appears to have a background in both diplomacy and weapons development. Her staff includes former military officers, scientists, and what humans call negotiation specialists. Their methods are unconventional." "In what way?" Vex 9 consulted his datapad nervously. "Well, sir, when the Rigelian Trade Consortium refused to establish formal relations with humanity, Director Martinez invited their leadership to a dinner party aboard one of their embassy stations. The menu featured delicacies from 37 different species, prepared using techniques that shouldn't be possible without centuries of culinary evolution. The Rigelians signed a comprehensive trade agreement before dessert was served." "That doesn't sound particularly aggressive." The aggressive part came when they discovered that every ingredient in the meal had been synthesized using technology the humans developed in the past 18 months. They effectively demonstrated that they'd mastered the agricultural and biochemical processes of 36 civilizations during the course of a single dinner party. Thex Prime rubbed his temples with two of his smaller appendages. And now, Admiral Torres wants to talk with me personally. Yes, sir. I should mention that her message included what appears to be a detailed schematic of our flagship's defensive systems, accurate to within 0.03%. How could they possibly know our defensive specifications? We're still investigating that, sir, but preliminary analysis suggests they've been conducting passive scans of every hegemony vessel they've encountered. Their sensor technology appears to be several generations ahead of our own. The irony was devastating. In attempting to give humanity rope to hang themselves with, the hegemony had instead provided them with the tools to build a ladder to galactic supremacy. Schedule the meeting, Thex Prime ordered, and prepare our most advanced diplomatic protocols. If we're going to negotiate with these humans, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. 3 days later, Admiral Torres arrived at the designated meeting coordinates aboard a ship that defied every principle of sensible starship design. The vessel appeared to be a fusion of organic curves and crystalline geometries, with hull plating that shifted color based on the ambient light conditions. According to the sensor readings, it was roughly the size of a city and powered by technology that shouldn't exist. "Welcome aboard the Diplomatic Solution," Torres said, as she materialized in the Hegemony flagship's main conference chamber. She was accompanied by a small entourage that included Commander Price, Dr. Webb, and a tall woman with silver hair who introduced herself as Director Martinez. "Admiral Torres," Thex Prime replied, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Thank you for accepting our invitation." Torres smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Supreme Commander, after everything your people have done for us, how could we refuse? Your generosity has transformed human civilization." The word generosity carried just enough emphasis to make it clear that Torres understood exactly what the hegemony had attempted to do. "We're pleased that our technology has proven useful," Thex Prime said carefully. "Useful is an understatement," Dr. Webb interjected enthusiastically. "Your fusion reactor designs inspired us to develop quantum cascade power systems. Your shield generators led to our discovery of dimensional barrier technology. And your weapons platforms helped us create defensive systems that make warfare practically obsolete." "Practically obsolete?" Thex Prime asked. Director Martinez stepped forward with the predatory smile of someone who enjoyed her work entirely too much. "We've developed what we call pacification fields. When activated, they prevent any aggressive action within their sphere of influence. Weapons won't fire, explosive devices won't detonate, and even harsh language becomes physically difficult to produce." Commander Price nodded approvingly. "We've installed them on all our embassy stations and major population centers. It's amazing how peaceful negotiations become when violence literally isn't an option." Thex Prime felt his confidence evaporating like morning mist. "That's impressive. But surely such technology has limitations." "Of course," Torres agreed. "The fields only extend about 50 light-years in all directions from the generator stations, and they only work on species that harbor aggressive intentions. Beings with peaceful motives can operate normally within the field boundaries." The implications hit Thex Prime like a collapsing star. If humanity had established embassy stations throughout the galaxy, and each station projected a 50 light-year pacification field, they'd effectively created a network of enforced peace zones that covered most of inhabited space. "How many embassy stations have you constructed?" he asked weakly. "Currently?" About 400 operational, with plans for expansion into previously unexplored sectors, Martinez replied cheerfully. We're particularly interested in establishing peaceful contact with any civilizations that might harbor hostile intentions toward emerging species. The message was crystal clear. Humanity had turned the galaxy into their personal peacekeeping zone, and anyone who objected would find themselves literally unable to do anything about it. There is one small matter we'd like to discuss, Torres said, her tone remaining conversational. Our intelligence networks have detected some concerning activities in certain hegemony sectors. What kind of activities? Thex Prime asked, though he suspected he already knew. Commander Price activated a holographic display showing detailed schematics of hegemony military installations, weapons testing facilities, fleet mobilization centers, and what appear to be staging areas for large-scale military operations. We're curious about the intended targets for these operations. Dr. Webb leaned forward with scientific curiosity. Our analysis suggests these preparations are designed for offensive actions against technologically inferior civilizations. The weapon configurations are specifically optimized for overwhelming less advanced defensive systems. Of course, Torres continued, we're sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation. Perhaps military exercises or preparation for defensive actions against unknown threats. Thex Prime realized he was trapped in a conversation where every possible response would either reveal hegemony aggressive intentions or force him to lie to beings who clearly already knew the truth. The hegemony maintains military readiness for various contingencies, he said diplomatically. Naturally, Martinez agreed, and we're sure you'll understand that humanity feels a certain responsibility to protect younger civilizations that might be vulnerable to such contingencies. In fact, Torres added, we've taken the liberty of establishing embassy stations in several systems that might be considered strategically important. We thought it would be helpful to have diplomatic representatives available to facilitate peaceful resolutions to any potential conflicts. The holographic display updated to show the locations of human embassy stations. Thex Prime stared in growing horror as he realized that humanity had positioned their diplomatic outposts in a perfect pattern to intercept any hegemony military operation against primitive civilizations. They'd been outmaneuvered by a species that had achieved interstellar flight using what appeared to be spare parts and sheer bloody-mindedness. This has been a most enlightening discussion, Torres said, rising from her chair. We look forward to many years of peaceful cooperation between our civilizations. Indeed, Thex Prime managed. Peace has always been the hegemony's primary objective. Wonderful, Martinez smiled. In that case, you won't mind if we establish a few more embassy stations in your border regions. Just to help maintain that peaceful atmosphere, of course. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Commander Price paused at the conference room door. Supreme Commander, there's something you should know about humans. We have another saying. The best defense is making sure your enemies can't attack you in the first place. She gestured toward the holographic display, still showing human embassy stations. Consider those stations our way of ensuring galactic peace, permanently. After the humans departed, Thex Prime sat alone in the conference chamber, staring at the tactical display that showed the true scope of humanity's expansion. In less than 2 years, they'd transformed from a primitive backwater species into the galaxy's unofficial peacekeeping force, using technology the hegemony had provided with the intention of ensuring their eventual destruction. The rope had become a net, and the hegemony found themselves tangled within it, alongside every other predatory civilization in the galaxy. His communication console chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Torres. Supreme Commander, I almost forgot. The Galactic Council has requested a meeting to discuss the establishment of new peaceful coexistence protocols. Humanity has been asked to mediate the discussions. We do hope the Hegemony will attend. After all, it would be rather aggressive not to participate in peace talks, don't you think? The transmission ended, leaving Thex Prime with the realization that humanity had just politely informed him that the Hegemony would be attending whether they wanted to or not. 6 months later, the Galactic Peace Accords were signed by representatives of over 3,000 civilizations. The treaty established humanity's embassy stations as neutral zones, where conflicts would be resolved through negotiation rather than violence. It also created the Interstellar Cooperation Initiative, with Earth serving as the coordinating headquarters for galaxy-wide peaceful development projects. Ambassador Vex 9 found himself assigned as the Hegemony's permanent representative to the new galactic government, working alongside Director Martinez to implement what humans called aggressive diplomacy. You realize, he said to her during a break in negotiations, that your species has essentially conquered the galaxy without firing a single shot. Martinez looked genuinely puzzled. Conquered? Vex, we haven't conquered anyone. We've simply made it impossible for anyone to conquer anyone else. There's a difference. And if a civilization refuses to accept your peace, then they find themselves in the awkward position of being the only aggressive species in a galaxy full of pacification fields. Martinez replied with that unsettling smile. Imagine trying to maintain a military dictatorship when your soldiers literally can't be violent. It tends to resolve itself rather quickly. Vex 9 looked out at the massive space station that now served as the galaxy's capital, watching ships from hundreds of different worlds docking peacefully alongside each other. Humans, it seemed, had taken the rope the Hegemony offered and woven it into a safety net for the entire galaxy. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? He asked. Not exactly, Martinez admitted, but Commander Price suspected what you were really offering. She figured any civilization advanced enough for galactic conquest wouldn't give away their military advantages unless there was a catch. So we decided to find out what that catch was and turn it to our advantage. And the improvements to our technology? Human engineering philosophy. If something can be built better, build it better. If it can be built faster, build it faster. And if it can be built to serve multiple purposes simultaneously, why wouldn't you? Vex 9 realized he was witnessing the birth of a new era in galactic civilization, one where humanity's peculiar combination of suspicion, ingenuity, and aggressive friendliness had transformed potential prey into the galaxy's self-appointed shepherds. The aliens had given them rope, intending to watch them hang. Instead, humanity had used it to tie the galaxy together in the most effective peace treaty in recorded history. And somewhere in the depths of space, Admiral Torres was probably still laughing at how easy it had been.